Can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Julia Campbell.
And I'm Iain Campbell.
We come from Australia. We live in Australia at a place called St Hubert's Island on the central coast of New South Wales.
So where were you on September 11th, 18 years ago?
I'll let you start if you like.
So on 9/11, we were actually returning to the United States on a United Airlines flight 929, which was flying from Heathrow to Chicago. We were actually living in San Diego at the time, but we had to connect with our San Diego flight in Chicago. So that's why we were on that particular flight. And we were returning from a trip to Scotland. I'm a biomedical research scientist, and I had been attending a conference in Edinburgh. And we'd spent some time in Scotland after the conference, and we were returning home to San Diego, what was our home back then in San Diego. So on 9/11, we were flying. It was UA 929, the flight that we were on. It was a 777, so it was a heavy aircraft with 189 passengers.
What do you remember about the captain's announcement? How did he explain his decision to land in Newfoundland, in Gander?
Our captain, his name was Mike Ballard, and I think we were probably around about 4 or 5 hours into the flight, and he just got onto the PA system and said, due to an occurrence in the United States, we're unable to land in the United States at the moment. So we have a perfectly healthy aircraft. We do need to jettison some fuel, so you'll experience some bumping. Don't be alarmed. We are, if you look at your screens, you can see that we're landing in a place called Gander. He was very calm, although I personally remember watching the flight attendants go up and down the aisles, with a look of great concern on their faces as they scoured the floors and kind of really looked intently in everybody's row. So Iain and I actually weren't sitting together on that flight. So the person next to me said, "There's something wrong." And nevertheless, we didn't know what was wrong. As I said, the captain was very calm, and he didn't really make us believe that there was anything untoward. We just had no reason. We didn't really know why we were landing in Gander, other than the fact that we just simply couldn't land in the United States at that time.
Did you know anything about Newfoundland at that point? Did you know that it was in Canada, or?
Yes, Iain and I are quite well travelled, and yes, we certainly knew where Newfoundland was. Gander, I don't think that I knew where Gander was at that time. Certainly I knew Newfoundland was part of Canada, yeah.
I knew of Gander because having flown for many years of my life, I have an interest in the aviation industry, and I did know that Gander was a very important airport many years ago as a stepping stone for refueling for both passenger airliners and military planes. So I was aware of Gander from that perspective, but that's all I knew about it, that it had a very important airport many years ago.
And how did other passengers react when they heard about, landing in Gander?
Look, I think at the time, before the captain actually came on, the flight started descending. I think that caused more concern among the passengers, because when the plane is starting to go down, you can feel it. And, our first thoughts were there was something wrong with the aircraft. So it was a little while before Captain Ballard came on the intercom and told us exactly, well, he didn't tell us what had happened in the US, but that the US airspace had been closed and they were being diverted to Gander. So I think once he reassured all the passengers that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the plane and that jettisoning the fuel is a standard procedure, because they can't land the plane heavy, otherwise it'll damage the gear of the landing gear of the plane. I think that calmed everybody down, and from there on, it was just I think it was very quiet inside the cabin. There wasn't any untoward events taking place at the time, and it wasn't really until we started our approach into Gander that we realized that we weren't the only aircraft that was in Gander. And as we landed at the airport, you look out the window, we could see it looked like the whole of Gander had turned out, and along the runway outside the fence, the boundary fence, there were just people all lined up along the fence taking photos, and there were cars parked all along there. So we knew that there was something major happening.
So when did you land approximately? Was it at night or evening in Gander?
It was in the daytime.
It's a daytime?
Yep.
It was around midday. I think our flight left Heathrow at 6 a.m. It was a very early flight, and I think we landed in Gander sometime around midday or 12:30 p.m.
What did the crew tell you after landing?
It wasn't for some time after landing. I can't recall exactly how long. I would say an hour or so after landing, that the captain put us through to BBC Radio in the UK after saying that there was a tragedy, an event which had occurred in the United States, and I'll now patch you through to the BBC to hear what's gone on. So we were all instructed to put on our headphones and listen to what had happened, which I think without the visual was almost more gut-wrenching, because I personally recall hearing screams as people were, well, what I found out later, after I'd subsequently seen the footage, that the screams of people as they had hurled themselves out the window of the World Trade Center. So just hearing instead of just seeing as well, I think was almost more emotional. And it wasn't till about 48 hours after 9/11 that we actually even saw what had happened, because we were on the plane for about 26 hours after we'd landed. And because there were, unbeknownst to us, there were 38 planes that had landed. And although we could see, our air conditioning broke at one point, so they had to open the cabin doors. And we kind of all huddled around to have a look to see what was going on. At this point, of course, we had found out through the headphones of BBC what had gone on. So we could see quite a few aircraft, but as I say, we didn't see any footage till we actually arrived at our place, which, as you know, is Gambo, and we'll get into that when you ask us more questions.
And for how long did you have to wait for permission to disembark?
Well, it was about 26 hours.
26 hours.
We'd already had our meal, our main meal, and during our flight. And when we landed, the crew very wisely did not offer passengers alcohol, which was a very smart, and they didn't know how long we were going to be on the aircraft at that point, but I think it was a wise move. And so we were just offered juice, water, soft drink, this kind of thing, whatever they had. And the only food that they had was actually a very squashed muesli bar, which that was all they had left in their supplies. And they were really, I remember them being very apologetic for that, because they kind of came all bent and it was a chewy one. Anyway, that's really all we could get as far as our food went for that rather lengthy period of time.
So what happened next? Tell me a bit about customs in Gander, I guess.
Yeah, well, when we disembarked, well, that when we had to obviously go down the stairs because there was no jetway. That's when we really saw how many planes there were, because then you did a 360 and there were planes to the front of you, to the side of you, to behind you, absolutely everywhere. And you realize the enormity of what had occurred. We didn't know really why it had taken so long for us to go through customs. Well, obviously there were so many people they had to process, but we were met simply by people from the Red Cross that gave us a little goodie bag with a toothbrush and I think a little sandwich and things like
toothpaste,
yeah,
sandwich.
When you're met by the Red Cross, once again, it just resonated that this is really very serious. You know, I mean, obviously, still not having the visual of it all, I don't think it had really hit us just how bad it was.
So when we disembarked, we were told we weren't going to be allowed to collect our check-in luggage. We could only take our carry-on luggage. So we only had our carry-on luggage with us. So depending on what you packed into your carry-on luggage, that was what you were going to be living from for however long it was going to be. And at that point, we really didn't know. And after being processed by Customs and Immigration, we were then told we were going to be taken to a town about 40 minutes from Gander called Gambo. So we were then all boarded onto the school buses and then driven down to Gambo from Gander.
About 40 minutes from Gander.
Yeah.
Gander was full. And it was also being, the crew from all of the aircraft were all being housed in Gander. So, of course, there were some plane people as well there, but it was all taken by the time we landed. We were the 22nd plane down.
Did you have an opportunity to call your family and friends from the airport?
Actually, well, prior to that, when we were still on the aircraft, well, most people didn't have mobile phones in those days. There was one chap, Lawrence Evans, who was very kind, a New Zealander that we met just, on the plane. And obviously, everybody was very concerned about trying to tell their family that they were in fact okay. They were just grounded somewhere. And Lawrence let us use his phone. We were able to call our neighbours who were looking after our house. But our daughter was living in Australia. She'd already relocated back to Australia at that time. And our son was on a trip in Indonesia, a surfing trip in Indonesia. So we couldn't actually contact them. However, we contacted our neighbours to let them know that we were okay. And if our children called, could they please try to contact them? And but your question was, how did you make contact once we were in Gambo? As I said, most people didn't have phones, but we had our computer and a couple of other people. There were only about 3 other passengers really that had computers. So we, together with the help of Teresa Burry from the Salvation Army Church, we set up a little kind of an office area, communication centre, I suppose you could call it, where we all let people use our computers to email their family if that was, something that they could do. But that was definitely through the help of Teresa. She was in charge of the Salvation Army Church for, with all of the passengers that had come in there at that time.
And before they took you to Gambo, did the captain and the crew tell you anything about communication, like how you'll stay in touch with them?
Oh, yes, they did. They said just to not leave the church, not to be more than 15 minutes away from the church, and that they would keep in contact as often as possible.
So you had no idea how long you will stay there?
Correct.
No, they didn't have any indication of how long it would be either. They said initially that it would be at least 24 hours, but they couldn't give us any time frame. So they said to us, as Julia mentioned, that we should not venture more than 15 to 20 minutes away from the Salvation Army accommodation that we had, in case we were suddenly given the go-ahead to leave, because they would have to move very quickly. And in terms of keeping in communication with everybody, the United crew from the flight we were on were being housed in a hotel in Gander. And they came to the Salvation Army Church every day to give us an update on what they had been given from headquarters, from United headquarters, in terms of information about when we might leave. So every single day they came to the Salvation Army Church, all the crew, and all the passengers and the crew would have a big meeting in the hall at the Salvation Army Church, and we were able to ask them questions. They were absolutely fantastic in keeping us informed and making sure that every single passenger was okay and that their needs were being taken care of. So the crew were outstanding. So outstanding that I wrote a letter to the United headquarters after we returned to the United States, commending the crew for, how good they were.
Did other passengers understand English? Could they comprehend what was going on?
Look, we had a small number of passengers, as far as I understand, that came from non-English speaking countries. In particular, we had a couple of passengers from Palestine. I don't recall now whether they spoke English very well or not, but the majority of passengers on our flight were US and English citizens. So I'm only aware of the Palestinian couple. Do you recall any others that?
I don't know of any others that didn't speak English.
What do you remember about the bus ride to Gambo? What was your first impression of Newfoundland, I guess?
Well, we didn't have much of a first impression other than landing at Gander, looking at all the people along the runway from town. The trip down to Gambo was I guess the first time that we had really had a chance to look around outside and see what was out there, and it looked quite beautiful. Lots of lakes, lots of pine forests. It was a very nice place. But I think all of us, when we disembarked and were on the buses, had a lot of trepidation, anxiety. We were tired because it had been 26 hours that we were on the plane. So I don't think at that point many of us really took in much of what was going on outside. We were probably much more thinking about what was happening in the US at that point, about our families, and that they might be concerned for us and that they were okay. So I think from memory it was pretty quiet heading down in the bus to Gambo.
Tell me a bit about the church. What were the sleeping arrangements like? Where exactly did you sleep?
I slept on an army stretcher that they were brought in, as many as they had available, and Iain had a church pew, and that was it.
But it worked.
Yeah.
And they housed us in the main meeting room of the church. So as I said, there were 189 passengers, and the majority of us were housed in this meeting room. So it was pretty full, as you can imagine, and every single pew had a person sleeping on it, and in between the pews were the stretchers. So it was really crowded in there, but it worked. We were able to get some sleep. And
prior to disembarking, the crew had actually requested that we take our pillows. So we did have our little tiny, aircraft pillow. I remember that.
Yeah.
That helped a little.
A little. And do you remember when approximately you got there to the church? How late was it?
Oh, it was in the daytime. because it was during the day that we disembarked. It's a good question, Alina, but it was a beautiful day. We did take a walk, only 15 minutes from church, and we found a beautiful little creek. There's a couple of photos that we took of us there. So what time? I would say it was it was also, it's September, so there was still quite a bit of light during the day. I think sometime after lunch-ish time, I think.
Yeah, it was
that one's a good question, but yeah, that one, certainly daytime.
Speaking of lunch, let's talk about food.
There was lots of it.
What did they give you? What kind of food was it?
Casseroles, stews, that kind of thing for lunches and for dinners. It was amazing from what I assumed at the time. People that lived in Gambo, in this very small village, had literally gone home to their own homes, kind of gathered together whatever food they had, thrown together what they could to collectively come up with a buffet kind of situation with tables laden with lots of, this was in the, in the beginning, the first couple of days anyway, until I suppose they got a system going where they then got some bigger cooking equipment and things like this. But in the beginning, there were just people who brought just their own casserole dishes or sandwiches, whatever they could muster together, they had for us. They knew that was obviously something that we were all going to need. And food is the way to people's hearts, but also we needed to survive. And we had no way of getting to any shops to get our own food. So they were providing it for us. And there was lots. It was, it was a seafood kind of a stew, I seem to recall. There was sausage stews. Breakfast was, cereals, toast, lots of
eggs,
toads, pancakes. Bacon. They just went all out, because they did actually have a kitchen, of course, as they do in one of these large churches, just for church functions and things. So it was a functional kitchen that lots of people, the community, could come in and help. And boy, did they help.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary, because I subsequently learned that the total population of Gambo at the time was around 2,100 people. And the number of plain people that descended upon Gambo within that 24-hour period was 1,600. So that is just quite extraordinary when you think about it, how this little town had to cater for this massive and sudden unexpected increase in its population. And they just did a heroic effort. And every day, as Julia said, they came in with this food. They set up the kitchen so that it could mass produce food for 189 people that were residing in the church. And it was a core group of ladies. I can't recall now whether they were members of the church or whether they were with the Red Cross from the town, that came in at breakfast, lunch and dinner. They came in and they cooked the meals, and we'd sit down with them. We've got pictures of passengers sitting down with these ladies who used to come in each
ladies
day.
And men. There were lots of men as well.
Preparing the food and distributing it to all the passengers. So yeah, it was.
But as soon as they'd cleaned up from breakfast, they'd set up for morning tea. They just weren't. It was just incredible. Ongoing.
How long did you stay in the church?
We were there for 5 days. I think it was the 6th day that we ended up leaving. What happened was that there was a list of all of the flights that had landed in Gander, and in the order in which they had actually touched down. So UA 929 was the 22nd plane down. And so what was supposed to happen, because we were given this information presumably from the crew, who, as Iain said, they would come regularly to let us know any kind of new news. We were supposed to fly out in the same order, but UA 929 kept getting bumped down. So you'd see Delta flight, blah, 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 they were below us, but suddenly they'd been bumped up ahead. So we were down the ladder again. We're thinking, well, what's going on here? So we ended up being what we believed to be the very last plane to leave. I think, as you know, the flights that European-based airlines had to go back to their European cities that they departed from, whereas the United States Airlines were allowed to go back, allowed to head on to their destination. So because we were a United flight, we were allowed to head on to Chicago. But we found out that the Air France flight that had departed from Paris had to go back to Paris. So anyway, we were there for a very long time, 5 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Remember which airlines stayed there, except Delta, United? What else from the list?
Well, I know Delta was, the Delta flight was with us in Gambo, but they were at a different.
Yeah. I mean, all of the major airlines that flew across the Atlantic had planes there. So American Airlines,
Yeah.
Continental, United, of course, which was us, Delta, KLM, British Airways, they were all Air France, they were all there, Lufthansa, every major airline that flew across the Atlantic at that time, I think, had one of its airliners grounded in Gander.
Did you get to meet passengers from other flights, or did you stay together as a group, your flight?
We were instructed to stay together and Iain and I took that very seriously, which was just us at the time. Others did, well, we did meet the occasional person, just on the very short walks that we'd taken, like to the creek, and found out they were on a Delta flight or whatever. But we didn't really do very much venturing from the church. We were trying to communicate with our family as best we could, and because of the time differences with where our two children were, they were in different time zones. It was really important for us to try and communicate with them. So we were kind of tied up at the church. We didn't venture out as some did, for instance, to the pubs. We didn't do that. We were told to stay 15 minutes from, within the boundaries of the church, 15 minutes away. We just took it very seriously. And I think we were just feeling so low at the time that it simply wasn't a time for socializing as much as we communicated and socialized with our own our passengers that were on our flight, because of having sharing meals with them and what have you, and also with the people that had kind of helped with the communications centre. We had quite a bit to do with each other, but they were just several people from our flight. So we didn't really socialise. It wasn't really a time for that, certainly in my mind, and I know in Iain's as well. We were pretty low, just like I think many people.
What do you remember the most about your stay in Gambo?
Oh my goodness. There are so many things. I think in my mind it was just how incredible the people of Gambo were, and particularly the staff at the Salvation Army Church, how quickly they were able to mobilise and to take care of this large number of passengers that just arrived suddenly. They set up communication centre, as Julia said, for us, because the church wasn't designed to have international communications. So very quickly they had technicians coming in and setting up a phone bank that allowed international phone calls. We were able to get modems set up so that we could do email and keep connected to the internet. They set up a big TV in the room where we were all sleeping, so that we could actually watch the news, and that all happened within a 24 to 48 hour period of arriving at the Salvation Army Church. So I think in my mind that's what really sticks most of all is the unbelievable effort that these people made to make sure that we were taken care of, that we had communication with our families. They treated us just like we were part of their own family, and that's what really sticks in my mind more than anything, because as Julia said, we stuck to the recommendations of the crew not to venture out too far from the church in case we suddenly got the call. But we also had a major family issue at the time, which you know, demanded that we keep in communication with our family, and that resolved itself eventually, but it took a few days to get it sorted out, and it was a major preoccupation for us during the period. And I think you'll find if you interview more plane people, that's the other incredible thing, that every single one of us has a story to tell. There were people, passengers with our flight, married couples who were going for honeymoons to the United States, a woman who was going to have in vitro fertilization and she missed the time because of the grounding. You know, it was quite remarkable. Every single person has their own story, which is, I guess that's what you'd expect, but it was...
Well, there were so many people.
Yeah, there were so many people.
And where did you take showers? I mean, there are no showers in the church, right?
No, that's right.
No, we didn't have any showers, Alina.
No showers. Well, we did have one shower.
There was one. We on the night before we actually got the call to leave. I think people were a little concerned about us because of the issues that we were having to deal with our own family, and thought that we might need just a little bit of respite, I suppose, from everything that was going on. So a house became available for someone, people who owned, Gambo people who owned this house, who were not in Gambo at the time. They were obviously traveling somewhere else themselves. Obviously contacted one of their relatives or something and said, look, please let people stay in our home. So we were taken in a car to these people. We've never seen these people, never laid eyes on them, but we were let into these people's home in order to have a shower, to actually sleep the night in a bed. And we weren't the only people. They brought another couple as well a few hours after we'd been there. So we did actually have a shower that particular night. So that was good. But then you got straight back into the same clothes that, you know, we'd been in for 5 days at this point.
Oh.
That's okay. You can do it if you have to. It's no big deal. Everybody else was in the same boat. So yes, these people, to this day, I've still never met them. I think Iain and I plan on going back to Gander and Gambo for the 2021 anniversary, and I would certainly like to know who those people were. I remember leaving them a note on their little coffee table saying thank you from us, but I don't know their names. I think I could, at a stretch, identify the home unless they've renovated it. Anything could happen in 20 years. But yes, so that was one shower that we had and a night in a bed. And then we went back to the church the next day, and it was early in the morning, the following day that we got the call. Yeah. Quite early in the morning, about 2, I think, a.m.
Wow, I can't even imagine sleeping in the church for 5 days. I mean, your bags probably hurt so much from sleeping on this hard surface.
Actually, when I think back, it kind of worked well, because the design of the pew, as you probably know, that the seat sort of has a slight angle to it, so you know you couldn't fall off it because your body would naturally fall back towards the back of the seat. So it was okay. I mean, I don't recall it being a particular hardship sleeping on the pew, and I think Julia and the others who had stretchers, they were fine as well.
Yeah. Close to the ground.
Yeah.
Couldn't fall out.
That's important.
Yeah, I seem to recall it was really, really low. to the ground.
Did any of the other passengers try to leave the island by bus or ferry? Or did everyone wait for the plane?
No, there were some.
There were a couple of people who tried. I think they were unsuccessful because I think that they were told, well, it's going to take this many hours to get to there, and it's going to take that many hours to get to there, and blah, 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 blah. And besides which, there are no rental cars available, and there's no... I think they were foiled. Yeah. Foiled before they even started.
Yeah, I am aware that there were a small number of passengers who were businessmen. They were on business trips, and they felt they needed to get back to the States as urgently as possible. And they tried a number of means to try and get from Gambo back to the US. But as Jules said, there were no rental cars available at that time. Suddenly all the rental cars had been rented out. They tried to, my understanding is they actually tried to get a private jet, but you couldn't fly back into the US airspace. It was closed. So that was no good. But yes, there were some passengers who tried desperately to get back to the US, but they were unable to.
Did you make any friends during your stay in Gambo?
Yes, we did. Teresa Burry was the main one. She was she the secretary?
I think she was the secretary
of the Salvation Army Church. You know, her role changed subsequently, but she was the main one. She just took a shine to us. She knew what our story was, and she was just a sweetheart.
She coordinated all of the church activities because she was a member of the congregation as well. So she coordinated all of the setting up of the communications and, you know, was always there for passengers who might need something or need assistance. You know, she was really quite remarkable.
Yeah. So she's the main one for us.
But subsequent to returning to the US, a website was set up called UA 929 by some of the passengers, which we belonged to, and that was on Facebook. Well, originally it was a website, but then they set up a Facebook site. So for the last 18 years, we've actually been keeping contact with everybody via Facebook, which has been fantastic. So we, you know, have regular interactions. Teresa, for example, is on that site. Diane Davis is on that site. So it's well worth becoming a member of that site if you're interested in the events that happen throughout 9/11, because there's a number of us that are members and have all our stories to tell.
You mentioned that people shared stories. What was the stories that touched you the most when you read all these messages on the site? Was there anything that stood out in particular?
Yeah, there's one from Steve. Steve's story, well, he was on our flight, of course. These are the UA 99 people. He used to be, I believe, in the police force, or pretty sure it was the police force. Anyway, when we were getting back on the plane after our five-day stint, and none of us knew this at the time, but Steve was approached by Mike Ballard, and they had actually done their research. They had looked into absolutely every single passenger's profile to make sure that whoever was getting back on UA 929 was okay. So they would have looked into Iain Campbell, into Julia Campbell, all behind the scenes. We didn't know any of this, and even when we were boarding. But according to Steve's story, and this is absolutely correct, it's like a 5-page story. When he boarded the plane, Mike Ballard approached him and said, look, I've looked into your background. I'm wondering if you can help me with security, please. And so the first class, there was a row of first class seats where those passengers, Middle Eastern, were not allowed to sit back in those seats. A panel, before disembarking, way back on 9/12, so 5 days prior to boarding to go back home, apparently the crew had found that a panel had been removed, and they were concerned that perhaps a weapon had been thrown down. They couldn't actually see right down to the bottom, so they couldn't actually find out if there was a weapon there. So they blocked off those seats in first class, and they had a flight attendant sit in the other side of first class, and they asked Steve if he would be the security guy for the entire flight, because Captain Ballard said, we've got 88,000 pounds of, fuel and whatever, we're technically speaking a bomb, and we've got passengers we've got family, we need to get home, and we need to land safely. So having learned that, and he said, and we were heading to a city full of skyscrapers. So that was a bit sobering to read that, to think that perhaps, who knows, we may have been one of the planes that was supposed to hit the Sears Tower, for instance, but our crew took it very, very seriously. It was a little disconcerting that a panel had been removed from a first class right next to the seat. Anyway, so reading his story was very interesting. If you just Google UA 929, you'll see, you don't even have to go to the Facebook page. You can actually read his story. It's about 5 pages, 4 or 5 pages.
Wow, sounds fascinating. I had no idea.
Yes. So that's just one person's story you can read, but I guess you can go to the site as well and read many others.
How about you, Iain? What story do you remember the most? Something that really surprised you or touched you from this site?
Oh, there were so many. As I mentioned, we knew fellow passengers, an English couple who were flying to the United States to have their honeymoon. They'd just been married. So they, of course, were unable to continue on to have their honeymoon because of the delays that had occurred through the diversion to Gambo. But I do recall that Teresa, again, took special care of those passengers as well, and they were actually put up in a house for a couple nights, one of the residents in Gambo, and that was their honeymoon. So I do particularly remember their story. I also mentioned the lady who was flying to the United States to have in vitro fertilization done, and how timing is absolutely critical for that. And because of the diversion, she missed the window to be able to collect her eggs to be fertilized.
We actually found that out on our flight to San Diego, though, because she was, unbeknownst to us, she also used to live in San Diego, but was just living in the UK at that time, and she was going back to San Diego for her in vitro fertilization. But yes, she missed the window. So we found that out on that flight, the San Diego leg, once after getting into Chicago and then getting onto our final leg home. Should mention that we found out that, well, we were the very last plane to land on United States soil. And so in landing in Chicago, when we touched down, they, all of the little baggage cart people, they got all of the baggage. Chicago was just kind of, well, absolutely just dead. It just seemed so quiet. Chicago's a really huge airport and usually bustling and what have you. But anyway, they took every single baggage cart, flanked the left-hand side of the plane, flanked the right-hand side of the plane, had baggage cart handlers stand one leg on one cart, one leg on the other, and then with their and had American flags in their hands and were waving like this once we'd actually parked. And that was the first thing that you were met with. And then there were all these cheers and cheers and tears once we landed. I don't think there was very much conversation on that flight from Gander to Chicago at all. Everyone was just silent and probably just quietly very, very nervous. And once we landed, there was a cheer because Mike did a great job in landing the plane as well. And then these baggage carts on either side of the plane. Then all of this music was piped through to the plane, American national music. And as we got off the jetway, United employees, just hundreds of them, flanked the sides of the jetways, and they too were congratulating us and holding our hands, and it was amazing, just amazing to experience that. And it that always gives me goosebumps, you know, just to think of that. It was very emotional.
Were you afraid to fly after what happened on 9/11?
No, not really. I had to go back to Europe, I think 2 weeks later, to Germany.
I refused to go on that trip.
Julia was due to fly with me, but she was not because she had a fear of flying. It was more because she was too tired from what had happened. And, you know, I had no problem with it. At that point, they had ramped up security and passage screening to an unprecedented level. So I think it was pretty safe, and it was an interesting flight because it was only about 1/3 full, and a lot of people had cancelled their flights through fear. And I do recall the captain coming up to every single passenger before we took off and thanking us for continuing to fly with the airline, which again was United. And no, you know, it was for people who had to fly for business. I don't think it was really an option to stop anyway. But I think we also felt that we're not going to let these terrorists rule our lives, and we have to get on with life and live it as we would, without letting them feel that they've won.
We both flew just a week or so after that, though, too, to Maui. And once again, the captain got on the PA system and just said, "Thanks so much for flying with United, and I'd like you to now all take a vote on what movie you would like to see." And you know, they were giving out free drinks, and they were just thanking people for putting your faith back in the airline and supporting them. So, you know, I think it was in their best interests to do that as well.
Well, they were struggling.
They were struggling.
There was a huge downturn in the industry after that.
Yeah, understandably.
Yeah.
What was the influence of this experience on your lives later on? Did it have any impact on you?
Well, it didn't really have an impact in the sense that it didn't stop us doing what we normally did. And we did a lot of traveling because my career at the time involved extensive international travel and domestic travel. So you know, we continued to do that. As I said, I think at that point our children had left home. Our daughter was living back in Australia, and our son, he was living elsewhere in San Diego. So, you know, in terms of family, it didn't have any major impact. I mean, it didn't force us to change our lives.
No.
But we certainly, you know, remember in great detail the events that happened that week and the extraordinary kindness and effort that the people in Newfoundland mounted to help us.
When did you first hear about Come From Away musical?
Come From Away. It was actually through the UA 929 website.
That's right.
So the Come From Away production, I think, first showed in La Jolla, which is a suburb of San Diego. where we've been. So the very first show was premiered in La Jolla.
Also, where Iain used to work.
Where I used to work.
Really?
Kind of ironic.
It's really ironic.
Coincidence.
Yeah, it is.
And so it was on the UA99 site, and as the show went to New York, and I think it went to Toronto, and then across to London, all the passengers that had lived in those areas would have say, oh, we went to Campoy and how wonderful the show was. And so, we had already heard about the show before it came to Australia. And it was through the UA929 site that Diane Davis actually asked if anybody knew of the two Australians who had been diverted to Newfoundland during 9/11. And I saw her posting and responded to her. And at that point, Diane mentioned that the show was coming to Australia, and she put us in contact. And from that point, we were in contact with the production company in Melbourne that were doing the show here in Australia. And they were very kind to invite us down for the premiere, and we were able to see the show. Yeah, it's been quite a remarkable experience, actually.
Yeah.
What did it feel like to see it for the very first time?
Oh, unbelievable.
It's incredible.
It just draws you in from the second it starts. It just...
it's amazingly accurate, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly accurate. That's the first thing. But it's so cleverly crafted because it portrays the story, doesn't shy away from the tragic events of what happened, but it focuses on the good that came from it. And there was so much good that was obviously shown to, close to 8,000 passengers that were stranded there. And everybody had a story. And it's really only about, obviously it can only focus on a few people's stories, but wow, it's just amazing. The music, you've obviously seen it, Alina, have you?
So 10 times.
So yeah, I know that Diane has seen it umpteen times, and I know so many people who've seen it hundreds of times. And I was thinking, how could you do that? Having now seen it twice, I can get it, because the very first time you see it, I think it's so clever, because I think most people probably with music need to listen to music and lyrics a few times before you kind of remember and want to sing along. Not in this case. Bang, gets you, draws you in instantly. That's genuine. I don't think you have to have anything at all to do with 9/11 to enjoy what I consider to be probably the best musical I've ever seen. And the other thing that's so marvelous is that it just not only grabs you from the first second, but it keeps you there, it holds you there, it just lingers right till the very end, and it just makes you, I'm sure at your performances, certainly at ours, everybody just stands up with a standing ovation, because the band that plays, the finale, the last song that's just amazing, just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an absolute masterpiece, I think, because they've been able to create all of the emotions that the plane people like us went through, and they told a few of the stories of the plane people, the air crew that were involved, but then at the same time, you've got all the stories of the Newfoundlanders and their quirky habits that creep into it in various ways.
Love it.
And it's just, as I said, it's quite a masterpiece and extraordinarily entertaining. So you don't have to be plane people like us to be able to enjoy and get the messages that are coming out of it. And yeah, as Jill said, the musical score is just superb, absolutely superb.
I also think the timing is just, they were very perceptive in just making it short and sweet, fast No, just action-packed from the second you start, right through to the end. No interval, brilliant. I mean, that's not to say that some shows should have intervals. I'm sure that they should. I think in this case, it probably enhances the experience by not having an interval. One of the cast of Come From Away here in Australia said, yeah, what David and Irene wanted to do was to make it as real as possible. And what the Gander, Gambo, wherever you were in Newfoundland, people were experiencing was 24/7. And that this is just such a quick, a glimpse into what happened over 5 to 6 days in our lives. But they got it all right. They obviously did their research, and it couldn't have been more accurate. It really couldn't have been.
What was your favorite scene or song?
Oh.
Something that really spoke to you?
The Rock.
I don't know. I think that's really hard. I was going over one last night or early this morning, just in a little waking phase of, I'm not going to sing it because I'll embarrass myself, Alina, but I am an islander, I am an islander. That's great. Really good.
What was it like to meet all these people? I guess you met the creative team, right? During the premiere.
Oh, well, did we meet the creative team?
We didn't meet David and Irene. I think David had been out here. I wasn't sure whether Irene had earlier, but they had gone back to Canada. So we met a number of people associated with the Australian production company that were responsible for putting it together here in Australia. So it was quite an experience.
Did your children see it?
No, they haven't seen it yet. No, they don't live in Melbourne. They've also got very young children, so it's not really something that they probably wouldn't go down to Melbourne to do at this point.
Hopefully it'll come to Sydney.
Yeah. Mind you, my cousin is going down in a couple of weeks to see it. We met up with him just a few weeks ago, and we were having a conversation with he and his wife, and Christine was saying, oh yes, we've got something nice planned. We're going down to Melbourne to see a really good show. You really should probably go and see it. It's called Come From Away. I don't know if you know about it. We said, oh, well, yes, actually, we do know a bit about that. So they're going down to see it in a few weeks' time. She'd heard from her son, who'd seen it in New York, how marvellous it was. So, and she's also been, I guess there's a lot of people in Australia that are following what went on in 9/11 and the Come From Away musical. So, and my sister's going down to see it in December. So, yeah, I think word's getting out.
Oh yeah, it's been a big hit in Australia.
Has been a big hit.
Yeah, and at the moment it's only showing in Melbourne. As I said, we hope that it'll come to Sydney. I know it's now going to China.
Yeah,
so that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean it's a measure of the quality of that show, that it's been so successful in every country that it's been to, even here in Australia, which is so far removed from Northern America and Newfoundland, that Australians can still relate to the message of kindness and the extraordinary events that took place in Newfoundland after 9/11. It's really a true measure of how entertaining and how powerful the show is.
Is there anything you would like to talk about, Julia and Iain? Something I should have asked you about?
Oh, no, I think we probably.
Yeah, I think
we probably covered it. Yeah.
I read that you have a special kilt from Gambo.
Exhibit A. I do. This is. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, this is the quilt that Teresa Burry had actually made herself. I think she's hand stitched it, part of it, and she gave it to me for my blanket when we were there for those 5 days. And as we were leaving, and this was the other thing, 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's people lined up to say goodbye to us. I mean, they should be in bed asleep themselves, but no, they came to say goodbye. And Teresa was there, and I had my blanket, and I folded it up, and I said, "Thank you so much." And she said, "No, I want you to take that home with you." See, it's going to make me cry now. So it was actually just used on Friday night by our granddaughter. So it gets used all the time.
Wow.
But the other thing I have, Alina, is my little souvenir here. Can you see that?
Yeah, it says Gander and there is a moose on surfing board.
It's a sweatshirt. It's
Aww.
old, but look, I still use it. The reason, of course, that had so much significance was that, as you've probably read, our son we told you that he was in Indonesia on a surf trip, and during 9/11, and of course he couldn't get back to the United States either. But we did get an email from him saying that he had a staph infection, and that the medical team in Indonesia had recommended amputation of his foot. So he, of course, wasn't going to have a bar of that. So he said, "I'm going to make my way to Singapore." We couldn't ever phone him. No, there was one phone call, actually. We did have one phone call, but most of the communication was through email. So he managed to get himself to Singapore. They said the same thing, need to amputate your foot because the infection was spreading. And so we said, "Well, look, I think you can't get back to the United States for proper medical attention. Let's get you. We'll see if we can get you to Australia." So with the help of my sister, our daughter, and my sister's ex-boyfriend, who was a pediatrician, he managed to get to Australia, was met by Iain, my sister's ex-boyfriend, and taken straight to hospital, and he was given massive amounts of antibiotics and did not have to have his foot amputated. But this was something that had been going on for the entire time while we were stranded there in Gambo, and we felt so completely and utterly helpless that we couldn't help him in a really dire moment of his life. Anyway, he was okay. But when I saw the moose on this sweatshirt on a surfboard, I just thought, if that is not for me, then, and it said Gander, then I was going to have it. And I am never getting rid of that sweatshirt, along with my lovely quilt too. And Iain's got something to show.
Can I just show you the message that Teresa left? Because I guess we must have been on a walk, but Teresa left this message for us, and that was the point that we found out that our son had got back to Sydney and he was going to be okay.
Oh. I'm so glad that he's okay, and they didn't have to amputate his foot. That's terrible.
That's right, but we found out that he had this injury from surfing on the day after we arrived in Gambo, and then it preoccupied us for most of the time, as Jules said, during our stay there, trying to keep up some communication with our son, but also coordinating his evacuation from Singapore back to Australia.
There was also one of the other people who had a computer at the time, Monty, who was kind of our team leader of UA 929, very nice Dutch chap. He was also communicating with people in Holland, trying to get information to help us with our son stranded in Indonesia. It was really amazing how many people were trying to help us. So, of course, so many people lost their lives on 9/11, and yet your own family and your own lives eventually kind of take over your own emotions. So obviously we were very concerned about what was happening with our son, and others took it very seriously too, and really tried to help. But of course, Hamish couldn't. So with Monty, Hamish couldn't get to Holland, but he was trying to do all kinds of things, wasn't he, with the medical team there? So yeah, it was pretty intense.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me the Hannah story from the Come From Away musical.
Oh yes, the Hannah
But
story.
he is there and I'm here and I can't be there for him. Yeah.
Oh, unbelievable. Yeah. That's right. You know, I mean, at close to 8,000 people there that landed, there are 8,000 stories that could have been told. You know, there were other people on our flight who were trying. I remember some chap was trying to get to his father's funeral. I mean, you know, I'm sure people missed parents' deaths, or well, obviously Hannah's was just so incredibly tragic. There were just so many tragedies. Iain's secretary's niece was in fact on the Pennsylvania flight. We found it went down. So that was one of the very first things that we found out, because obviously we had email, and Annette was Iain's secretary, and she had emailed Iain to say her niece had gone down on the flight in Pennsylvania. So really everything was hitting home. It was that we were directly affected quite a bit.
You know, my cousin was in New York at the time. She was supposed to depart from New York on 9/11.
Oh, really?
And she was stranded in the JFK airport like 4 days, and she was terrified.
Yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, she was lucky because she was at the airport at the time, but still she was stuck there, and she doesn't even want to talk about it. Like, she doesn't like thinking about it.
No, it really, it did affect people very, very, very deeply.
And, you know, we do like to think about it, and we like to talk about it, because we were actually extremely fortunate.
Yeah.
And we're extremely grateful for that. You know, we were the beneficiaries of the greatest of human kindness at a time of the worst evil and tragedy. And so as I said, we were extremely fortunate, and we often think about the people in Gander and Gambo and the wonderful effort that they pulled out to help us all when we arrived there. And as Jules said, we're planning to go back in 2021 for the 20-year anniversary.
We can meet you there.
It'll be the first time that we've returned, so it's going to be a very emotional, but I think wonderful time catching up.
Probably cathartic too.
Yeah.
I really hope to see you here in Newfoundland in 2021.
We've already made plans.
You know, I went to Gander and Appleton last month for the anniversary. I attended tribute service both in Appleton and in Gander.
Oh, right. Were they
so special to be there on this day, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we thought that it would be really special to be there on the 20-year anniversary.
And probably many other plane people will come as well, because it's like, you know, 20 years. It's a big milestone.
Yeah, I think they may well get, hopefully not 8,000 people land on their doorsteps, but maybe they'll get half of that. I hope they have a few rooms there in Gander. Well, actually, people have said they can put us up in their homes and things. So I'm sure hotels will be full.
Yeah, just in case you should book in advance.
I know, exactly. Right. We will. We've already got plans in place. We're going to kind of make it almost around the world type of a trip. So it's already in place.
Iain, can you tell me a bit about the book that you showed me? Like, what else is in that book? Like, is it everything related to Gambo and Gander, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's
our photo album.
It's a scrapbook that we put together after we came back. It just has all the photos that we took and our email correspondence with our family. And we also had our neighbour kept that for us, which is of course, the newspaper with the headlines of what happened in New York. But yeah, it's got all our photos in it.
We can send some to
if
you.
you're
If
interested
you like,
in any of the photos, we can certainly send you them.
Thank you.
Look, I'll show you this one here. It's Julia with a very anxious look on her face, emailing Hamish.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that's the Salvation.
What?
Oh, that's the Salvation Army Church in the top there where we stay. But we've got lots of photos. I'm happy to send them to you if you would like a copy of them.
Sure, I would love to. I mean, we don't have anything in our archive in St. John's, Newfoundland, so I'm collecting as many stories as I can and photographs and everything. Because it's important to preserve it.
That's me on the pew.
Wow.
So yeah, I can scan these and send you a copy of them all if you're interested in having a copy.
Thank you. That's so kind of you.
Pleasure. You're obviously this is, you know, we're your first plane people then, are we? That you need to be.
You are.
Wow.
All right.
And it's my very first Skype conversation ever as well. So I have never used Skype before.
Yeah.
Well, Diane Davis knows lots of plane people, so she'll be able to hook you up with others as well.
Yeah, she is remarkable.
Yeah.
I met her last month, and she's such a wonderful woman, one of a kind.
A wonderful woman, and she always says that she still gets very, very, very emotional, and she cries because it's just natural it's very difficult to not cry still, even though it's nearly 20 years. It was such an amazingly emotional time, and I think so. When you ask, has it affected us? I suppose it's really affected us that way, that when we speak about our experience in Gander / Gambo, it is an emotional response. It still can make you cry.
Yeah, many of the people whom I interviewed in Gathers, they were actually crying during our interview. I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's been 18 years.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
But still, Diane and Flint, the former mayor of Appleton, and his wife, all of them were crying when they heard about these events.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
It's just, I know. So it had a profound effect on us. It doesn't stop us from going on with our lives, but it still grabs at your heart. Can't help it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. It meant the world to me. Thank you for making time.
Our pleasure.
Don't hesitate to call if there's something that we have, or email first if we haven't covered something. So that's fine. It's been lovely to speak with you.